We are live on Ohio Exopolitics Radio. I'm your host, Mark Snyder, and it's good to be back on the air. I had a very interesting morning and afternoon. I kind of slept in today. I haven't done that in quite a long time. Beautiful day today, about 80 degrees, sunny. We are enjoying a beautiful day here in East Central Ohio. Today we're going to talk about the creational natural laws, define fluido forces. I'm going to talk about Dr. Bruce Lipton's work for the first, that's still part of the first hour of the show, then Reincarnation, and then for part 2 of the show, I'm going to bring Barbara DeLong on. We're going to talk about Emmanuel, talk about the creation over population, and DPS, the Deep Space Platform, and the New World Order, and where our future could go if we don't turn ourselves around. For people that are just tuning in, this program spends a lot of time on the writings of Edward Albert Meyer. Billy Meyer's an 81-year-old man. He lives in Switzerland in a place called Hinterschmidruti. Hinter means behind in the German, and behind Schmidruti, which is, Schmidruti is a tiny mountain village about 45 minutes east of Zurich in the snow-capped mountains of Switzerland and in the beautiful pine forests. Billy has an amazing book. It's called The Might of Thoughts, Macht der Gedanken in the German. And I've been literally reading this book over and over again for years, and it just proves to me how obtuse I am. I've missed so many things in this book. It's a little amazing. What I'm going to first talk about are the creational natural laws. And there are laws in our universe. These are called the creational natural laws. The first law is the law of love. It refers to the highest form of love, not romantic love, but effective love. There's a lot of interesting writings Billy has about this concept. And, for example, there's a writing called Love Letter 27. It has the most profound statements in it, like love is the highest principle in all creation. And through it, everything exists in absolute logic. He also says every tiny plant, every tiny animal fulfills its purpose in love. Love will forever be the purpose of our existence. Some interesting things also covered in writings similar to this is where he says love and wisdom go together, and the creation and its laws are love and wisdom together. So a little bit later I'll talk about what creation is. It's in the highest level, it's our universe. Our universe also has an intelligence behind it, an intelligence which isn't a personality. It isn't a persona. For example, it's not a father. It's not a heavenly father. Neither is it Mother Nature. It really has no personality, which is a hard thing for people to understand, including myself. It's part of the mystery of creation. It's an intelligence which has no personality. And I'll talk more about that maybe in the second hour when I make some comparisons between the universal consciousness and trees and what they're similar in ways that they're similar. So we're talking about the first creational natural law, which is the law of love, which is not romantic love. Romantic love is sometimes called artificial love. It's very unstable. It can break down into aggression and fighting, and that's why 70% of all marriages end in divorce, because most of them are based pretty much solely on romantic love, which is extremely unstable. We're talking about a love that literally radiates from creation. And if you spend time outside and you live in an area that still has trees and plants and animals, and you can sense the radiating love of creation. So that's the first law, the law of love. which is a kind of very profound respect. That's what real love is. It's not anything romantic. It's a very profound respect. The second law of nature, the second creational natural law, is called the law of striving. It's the fundamental law of all evolution. Without striving, there is no life. Every plant, every animal strives. Even a tree strives to grow, and it strives to move towards the sunlight. Plants and animals, they all strive. They have to strive to survive. If you're in a state in your life where your happiness is very low, there's a lot of suicide today, and a lot of this can be stopped by merely people having enough focus to work, and work particularly on things that improve your evolution, make you smarter, reading and studying, and also just simple work around the house like cleaning your garage, organization. These are all part of the law of striving. Without striving, there is no sense of life. You will have a very profound depression that kicks in when you fall out of your natural striving. The third law of nature is the law of harmony. And there's a bipolar structural composition to everything that exists. In other words, there's a positive and a negative. In any situation, for example, a magnet has a positive side and a negative side. Your life has positives in it as well as negatives. And the positive and the negative are two forces which should never be separated. They belong together. In fact, they depend on one another. If you try to eliminate the negative in your life, you're going to go into what's called Erstarrung in the German, which means to be out of control of the good human nature. The law of harmony requires that we have a negative and a positive in our lives. So if you follow these three laws, the law of love, the law of striving, the law of harmony, it leads to the law of prosperity and abundance. Every life form, and therefore also the human being, has everything in plentiful abundance in order to live and evolve without having to live in want. Now, because we are violating all kinds of creational natural laws all the time, you'll see sometimes the law of prosperity and abundance will break down because there's almost 9 billion people on our planet and we're destroying nature. So this is having horrible, horrible side effects that is turning the planet into what I call the planet of unnecessary death, where you see death all over, death on the sides of the roads, hear about death on the news every day. All of these deaths, which can be avoided. Now, the fifth creational natural law, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, is something I've missed for the longest time, and it proves that I'm obtuse. Slow to understand, let's say. It's called the law of universal creation. And that means that every thought that you have that is enlivened by might and power must, as a cause, bring a certain effect. In other words, your thoughts, when they're mightful, when they're intense, when they're purposeful, when they're associated with a life determination, when you have complete and utter confidence in them, they will bring about an effect. Now, it's possible that you can have thoughts that don't have any might associated with them, and they don't manifest in anything. So I'll just read here from the Might of Thoughts, page 12 in my edition, about this law of universal creation. As a matter of fact, the human being is not an artificial creation, but the creation of a creational intelligence, and thereby a creation which has evolved through the law of universal creation, of universal consciousness. This applies to the woman as to the man and to the children. But the law of universal creation is a law of cause and effect, as applies to all creational areas of law. And precisely this law says that every thought enlivened by might and power must, as a cause, also bring a quite certain effect. Everything which is kept concealed. Now this is interesting. I don't know that much about this part yet, but it's very intriguing. Everything which is concealed pertaining to the human being becomes obvious as a result of this cause and effect principle, since it absolutely and unwaveringly exposes the mysterious realms of the thinking. Once the effects of the thoughts become visible, audible, or perceptible, and indeed for the particular human being, himself or herself as well as for others, the effects of the casual thoughts are therefore as visible as the material things of the world. So your thoughts, when they're mightful, will have an effect. It's law of nature. It's called the law of universal creation, and I'm very, very surprised that I missed that, although I guess I shouldn't be. I'm continually amazed at all the things that I miss. You know, when you read these books, it's like peeling back layers of an onion. You just keep peeling back different layers and more information. And there was something about another little topic I just wanted to cover, and it deals with, again, the might of the thoughts. It says, and this is on page 4, it says, Zeal-directed thoughts. Zeal, what is the zeal in the German? The zeal is a life determination, a culmination point. A simpler definition is goal or target, but Billy doesn't like that so much, so I don't use it too much. But zeal-directed thoughts, which are mightfully used, whereby a self-mightification arises in practice. Human beings are thereby able to show themselves their real and true greatness. So when you start to see the power that you have, when this process starts, and I'm just barely beginning this, so it says zeal-directed thoughts, which are then mightfully used, whereby a self-mightification arises in practice. Human beings are thereby able to show themselves their real and true greatness. I think I got a question. What is a mindful thought? Somebody said. I'm probably not pronouncing things very well. It's a mightful thought. It's a thought that has might and power and intensity. It has a purpose. It has a target. It's target-oriented. It's purposeful. That's the zeal-directed thought. So what does it mean to mightfully use the thoughts? That's what we're talking about. Might. Might uses power as it stands above power. Power is that which triggers or releases energy. Might is a factor that is ruling and controlling. And I think that thought needs to be purposeful. It should ideally be totally certain, with no doubts. And that's when it's most effective. You see, all your thoughts manifest a bit. So, and a lot of this information that I'm talking to you about, it has to go down into the subconscious to be really, really effective. And I'm going to talk about this more in the first hour. How do we get this information down into the subconscious? And it's critical that we repeat so that our subconscious mind will be trained with the new information. And it's the only way your subconscious mind can learn is through repetition. You can also inculcate your subconscious mind with those tapes, like if you go into a sleep state and play tapes. Otherwise, and there's this new technique that Dr. Bruce Lipton talks about that I can't even really discuss yet, but Dr. Lipton talks about the negative programs that we are playing in our subconscious. We're playing these all the time, and we downloaded those negative programs. Most of them are negative. Some of them are positive, but most of them are negative. We downloaded those during the first 7 years of our life. So the first 7 years of our life, we're kind of in a hypnotic theta state. And we're recording the behavior of others. We're recording the behavior of your father, your mother, your older sisters or brothers, your grandparents, your aunts and uncles. So this is something that goes right into our memory, and then later in life we play these things back. And what's unfortunate, many of these behaviors are negative. One thing that we tend to do is rotate these negative thoughts, and that causes a great deal of damage to our psyche. So what, again, the first 7 years of your life, you're kind of in this theta state. Your brain waves are 3 to 8 hertz. The theta often occurs during sleep or deep meditation. And theta is a gateway to learning, to memory, to intuition. So anyway, once we discover the power of our thoughts, once we discover how to make our thoughts mightful, we start to be convinced and we start to become more confident. I wanted to talk about how to program your subconscious a little bit. Now, this is a little bit off the Meyer material. This gets into Dr. Bruce Lipton a little bit, just to give you a frame of reference where this is coming from. When I read through the book, The Might of Thoughts, one of the things I did is I took notes on the various characteristics, because in the law of harmony, if you remember that creational natural law, where we have a neutral positive thought pattern, well, what is that? What are our characteristics of our thinking when we have a neutral positive thought pattern? See, it's a little more positive than what I envisioned, because Billy describes these things, and I'll say them as an affirmation because this is how I remember them. I am confident, I am optimistic, I am relaxed, I am cheerful, I'm enthusiastic, I persist, I persevere, I endure, I am calm, I am satisfied, I'm the master of my own destiny, I'm the forger of my own fortune, I create my own good luck, I do not allow my thoughts to drift, I steer my thoughts like a captain steers his ship. It is the nature of the thoughts that by their might alone, every conceivable thing can be brought to fruition. So if you repeat these kinds of things, and you may come up with your own, then you can program your subconscious, and you can overwrite those negative programs, because you have negative programs, I have negative programs, and they rotate, they replay, and sometimes, you're trying to press the stop button and the dang thing just won't stop. So it's the might of your thoughts that cause them to manifest. And remember, negative or positive circumstances can develop because of your thoughts. It's not just the neutral positive thoughts that manifest, but the negative ones do as well. Mightful thoughts are the kind of thoughts that manifest. So in the conscious use of the might of our thoughts, we show ourselves our real and true greatness. Let me read that again. It says, Zeal-directed thoughts which are mightfully used, whereby a self-mightification arises in practice, human beings are thereby able to show themselves their real and true greatness. And in conscious use of the might of their thoughts, they show themselves their own capabilities, and they also prove that they have a means at their disposal with which they can form their futures and their entire lives according to their own wishes and ideas. So you can create a heaven on earth if you can master that. These principles, which I'm not saying are easy. I'm saying it's pretty challenging, but it can be done. So that was the first topic I wanted to talk about, which I kind of put under creational natural laws. The second topic I wanted to discuss this first hour is the mental fluido energies. So your brain, when you're thinking, it literally charges things around you. So particularly if you've lived in the same house for a while, like for example, my desk here, my book, The Might of Thoughts, for example, it has the energies of my mind in them. My instruments, my guitars, my furniture, my trees out there, they all have the energies of my mind in there. And that's called the mental fluido powers. These are our personal emanations. It's also called the swinging wave in the Maya information. So these powers, they come from the thoughts and the feelings. It's really interesting because the swinging waves contain the character of the human being. One of the things I think that, with all the incredible musical artists out there, if you get a good artist, a good musician, or a good singer, you literally experience the character of that human being in the movements of their consciousness. So the power of your thoughts, they settle into your skeleton, your physical skeleton, which is very important because we should not be cremated, because we should have that skeleton intact. Because in later lifetimes, you can make a back connection to that skeleton of your previous life. And somehow that gives us, I think, a boost or some kind of confidence when that happens. So the swinging waves, they contain the character of the human being, the movements of the consciousness. Those powers, they settle into the skeleton of the human being. They emanate out from the consciousness, and this mental swinging wave that comes out from the thoughts, they're deposited into objects, into books, clothing, jewelry, and the longer these things surround the person, the more intensively they will be charged. So if you read a book, like I've read the Might of Thoughts for many years now, and my mental energies are deposited in this book, so I can reconnect just by touching this book. Reconnect with all the thought patterns associated with this information. And again, this energy, it settles into your skeleton and into the objects around you. Now, that's one reason why you should never wear another person's ring. You shouldn't wear other people's jewelry, because you can be influenced by their mental fluidal forces. And the swinging wave is associated to the personality, to the psyche, to the feeling. And the thoughts are actually deposited into the things around you. And the energy of the mind goes into your walls and into your clothes. The human being can only perceive this fluidal power in a feeling way. When a person enters a house, they might feel attracted or repel. If you have a piece of clothing, for example, I have a sweatshirt. I don't like that much the way it looks on me, but when I wear it, I feel fine and good for some reason. And it's probably because I've deposited many positive swinging waves into that clothing. And these positive energies, they surround the human being like their own world and provide a sense of security for them. And it's so interesting around my house here that I have about 2 acres, and I'm located basically adjacent to a state park. So it's just a lot of trees around here and a farmer's field on the side. I'm up on a hill. And I have about 30 trees in my 2 acres, and I'm always, every year I collect more trees and get more trees planted. And this makes a positive environment for me. So, and the human being can perceive this energy. The energy of your thoughts, your fluido powers goes into the walls, into the things around your house. And when you enter a house, you may feel attracted or repelled because of the fluido energies that are in that house. And if you have a piece of clothing that makes you feel good, like I was talking about that sweatshirt, then you probably have deposited swinging waves into that sweatshirt or that whatever piece of clothing. Positive energies deposit into items, surround the human being like their own world, and they provide a sense of security to them. And there also can be negative swinging waves that deposit in things around a person. So if you have negative thoughts, have you ever gone, for example, into a school? And I perceive that many schools have a lot of negative thoughts deposited into them because kids are struggling when they're maturing, and they have a lot of fear and a lot of worry. And in school buildings, if you go into a school building, I always get this feeling like, you feel this negative swinging wave that's coming forth from that. And this is very critical, and Billy talks about this, and he doesn't enter into any of the older monasteries around Switzerland because he's extremely sensitive to these fluido energies. And think of these old monasteries in Europe that are centuries old, where people have died, and all the grief of all the death of the loved ones, the energies are stored in that building, and all the confusion and oppression and tyranny associated with various religions and all the bad things that go on are stored in these buildings. And people come into these buildings and they are assaulted by all these negative energies. So you want to stay out of places like that. And you want to build up the energies around your little world, your oasis. The trees will absorb the energies of your fluido powers. All animals and plants have fluido powers associated with them. All animals have fluido powers that come from their instinct. So if you have animals, if you have pets, you'll immediately notice that you're both enhanced by the fluido energies that come off of you. And because it's a natural love, and it's a natural, when a ripple goes into a pond, when the vibration comes off of two separate things, those vibrations, if they're on the same wavelength, will enhance one another. It's like harmony. If a tone is a third above another tone and a harmonial third appears, or a harmonial fifth, then you have this beautiful harmony. And that's what happens, when your pets come into your periphery and they climb up on your body, or they jump up on a table, or if you have a cat, or if your dog rubs against you, you get the fluido powers associated with the instinct, and they get the fluido powers associated with your thoughts as a higher being, and this can be a very, very, and that's why people that are older often do better when they have pets, because of the energies. So always work to enhance your fluido energy. Always in your thoughts, I am confident, I am optimistic, I am relaxed, I am cheerful, I'm enthusiastic. So you're creating a positive fluido energy, and that will attract neutral positive events to you. So anyway, these swinging waves, they deposit into the walls and the beams of a house. A specific piece of clothing may have built up a large, healthy fluido energy. The longer something surrounds a person, the more they're charged by their mental energies. Or if you have a home where you're experiencing positive fluido energies, stay there as long as possible, because it's like a battery that's recharging you. But on the other hand, a negative energy from a person can charge things. And jewelry is an example where negative energies often goes into jewelry. So do not wear another person's jewelry, because you can get their negative swinging waves. And that can even cause nightmares and bad dreams. If your dog chews a bone, his fluido energies have gone into that bone. So when a person enters a house again, you may feel instinctively attracted or repelled. And we make a back connection many times to the earlier life when we have these fluido energies which goes out. The more balanced a person is, the stronger their fluido power and their protection. The more unstable the person is, the more they are impacted by negative swinging waves. So you have a fluido immune system. So if your thoughts are strong, your immune system is strong. Your energies which are emanating from you are extremely strong. And it's like a tide that raises all ships. So, for example, you can put out very positive information onto the internet, which will help many other people's fluido energies. So through the mental fluido energy, you can make back connections to previous lives. You can have a positive connection with people and plants and animals. But you can also draw mental problems to yourself that existed in a previous lifetime, which were not resolved. So, and you can have the same repeating thoughts that you've had from an earlier life. Old memories or problems can be released after many, many years, and it depends on the efforts of your consciousness. So, the impulses of your negative thoughts can be stored in the storage banks for many, many years, and many people will pull these negative impulses back, which will strike them over and over and over again. It's very interesting. I don't know if you've ever listened to Dr. Jordan Peterson. He's a very influential person that has come out to speak against some of the bad laws that are associated with social justice warriors now, and with the gender pronouns and such. But he has a big problem with depression. And I just wonder if he isn't pulling things back out of the storage banks from previous lives. And your subconscious will accept things from the storage banks. This signifies that a human being is in need maybe of evolutive help. And sometimes it helps to make these back connections. And this comes from the subconsciousness a lot. And you can have multiple back connections to previous lives. And these impulses from the previous lives, they can be held in the storage banks for practically an eternity. And these impulses will strike you over and over and over again as you need them. So, back connecting to fluidal powers can create sometimes something that looks like spiritual apparitions. And I'm talking about this a little bit more than I had planned on, but I'll just flow with it for a bit. But we'll talk more about these spiritual apparitions and where they come from. But if you make a back connection to a skeleton from a previous life, you're getting the most important kind of fluido energies. That's why we shouldn't be cremated, because when you're cremated, that destroys the skeleton, which contains the most important concentration of mental fluido powers to make the back connection to the previous life. Again, this is all done subconscious. You don't have any control over it. And so it's just something to keep in mind. If you can keep from being cremated, it's a very, very good idea. We can also be made weaker by moving frequently from one place to another, and that disrupts our connection to the fluido powers around us. And I wonder about musicians that are constantly on the road and how that might be disrupting. Again, I'm talking about this a little more than what I planned, but I want to continue here. Let's talk about the child apparitions. And all these apparitions are just mental fluido powers which are made mobile by the unconsciousness or the subconsciousness of a person. And typically, the individual is not aware that they are causing these apparitions. And the process takes place either subconsciously or unconsciously. For example, in the United States at around 4 p.m. every afternoon, the ghost of a child of a 10-year-old girl would appear. And she would sing and walk around the house. She would go into the garden and walk around. And that child had actually become an old lady. In other words, that child was the mental fluido energies of the older woman who actually lived in that house. And this older lady would actually nap in her armchair. And every day at around 4 p.m., when she was napping, her fluido energies would go out extremely strong, and she would have memories of her childhood in this house, which had stored up all of her fluido energies for her whole life. And she would have the dream that she was living in this house just like she did when she was a little girl. And she was unconsciously activating the fluido powers that were stored in that house. And the ghost was actually the mental fluido powers of this old lady. And her fluido energies had been stored in that house for years and years. So this is the power of our thoughts. This is the incredible power of our thoughts. And they had the same kind of thing in Hinterschmid-Rudy. They would have this apparition, this shadowy figure, which would dart around there in Hinterschmid-Rudy where Billy lives. It would make noises up in the attic. Then someone would switch the light on in the attic, and then there would be silence. But this was just the fluido energies that were stored in the house from the previous owners. There's a difference between fluido energies and pure thought swinging waves. Now, I'm not super familiar with this, but I'm going to just talk about it quickly. Pure thought swinging waves arise from the thoughts themselves. Now, fluido energies arise out of your entire mental block. So, and the mental swinging waves can be stored for thousands of years. And so just remember that the fluido energies come out of the entire mental block area. And maybe I'll end for this for now. This is way longer than I wanted to cover on this particular topic. But churches and monasteries, I talked about earlier, Billy doesn't go into these anymore. And these old church houses and monasteries can store incredible negative fluidal powers. The body and the skeleton of the human being store these negative energies, and so do these buildings. And for centuries, these fluidal energies are stored in these churches, monasteries, and places of pilgrimage. And the fluidal energies can contain very strong negative powers that can impact people in very dangerous ways. And a human being that is sensitive to these swinging waves can be very negatively affected. And these swinging waves are often stored in a degenerated form that can cause great damage to an evolved person. And these energies are overpowering to people, particularly if you're oriented to creational truth. But if you're a person that's very much into religion, if you're a strong believer, then you will become enslaved by these fluido energies. And I bet if you think back, you can remember being in certain churches where it just made you feel oppressed, or like you were squirming in your seat just to be there. And no one was saying anything, and it was quiet. And you're like, "Ooh, what's wrong?" You just feel this uncomfortable feeling. The human being, again, that is oriented to the truth, can be greatly damaged by these energies that are stored in these buildings and these blocks. If a human being goes into these older churches, some people can be killed by these negative blocks of energy that have stored up over the centuries. And Billy was one time nearly killed in one of these old monasteries in Switzerland. Okay, boy, enough of that. Very interesting topic, though. These fine fluido energies. And I was hoping that I could just briefly talk about some of Dr. Bruce Lipton's work. And it just goes hand in hand with the Mida thoughts so well. And then we can close out the first hour maybe with this. Maybe I can get in a little bit into reincarnation here too. But what we're going through right now is the total destruction of our environment. And we've had 5 mass extinction events on the Earth. And each time we have to start all over again. And right now I think we're in the 6th mass extinction event. And this one's because of the people living on the planet, not because we're being hit by a meteor or something. We're seeing the collapse of our ecosystem. And in our lifetime, the world is going to go through massive problems because the way we are living is very antagonistic to life. And the life that we experience is not an accident. We are the creators of our lives. We fall, for example, one of the ways that you're healthy, when you're healthy and young and you fall in love, you have this honeymoon experience. Well, you can have a kind of honeymoon experience with the creation at all times. And it's healthy love. It's not the unhealthy love that we go through many times in the honeymoon experience. We live in something that is akin to the Matrix. You can think of the Matrix movie as kind of a documentary. And we are being programmed in the Matrix right now. Our mind is creating our life. And we exist in the conscious mind. We have something called the subconscious, though, below that, which is a stimulus and response mind. And we can create from our sense of awareness. We have a creative mind in the consciousness. It has our wishes and desires. And we can look into the future with our conscious mind, Our creative mind is the source of our aspirations. But the subconscious mind consists of our habits, and we play these back like a program. The subconscious mind is very habitual, and we have to deal with these programs that are in our subconscious mind. The conscious mind can think, and we start to think. Sometimes we'll be off thinking about something, okay? And then the subconscious mind will kick in, and we don't realize it because we're off thinking about something. It can happen when you're driving. You're just driving along for miles because your subconscious is driving. Your conscious mind is off thinking about something else. And the subconscious mind is very, very many times more powerful than the conscious mind, even though it scares us to think that our subconscious is driving. During the first 7 years of our life, as I said earlier, our brain is functioning in the theta state. We're not really being conscious in the first 7 years. In fact, we mix fantasy and reality. We're kind of in a hypnosis stage. We're mostly in this theta state. Now, there's something called mirror neurons in the brain. And this is very interesting. They allow us to observe and download the behavior of others. These mirror neurons, they're exactly mirroring what someone else is doing. You've heard of role model. We default into the subconscious many times. It's the way people live their life. In fact, we have subconscious behavior most of the time, which people don't realize. 95% of the day, we are playing subconscious programs. 95% of the time, we are living a program that has come down through the generations from our parents and their parents. And most of these programs are disempowering, and they will sabotage your behavior. And only during 5% of the time are we actually using our conscious mind to live and to think the way we want to. We must say to ourselves over and over again those positive affirmations that I was talking about earlier in the present tense. Come up with your own. I'm confident, I'm optimistic, I'm strong, I'm healthy, I'm talented. So the key is to reprogram your subconscious mind using repetition. We must say to ourselves again and again in the present tense these positive affirmations. The subconscious mind only understands the present tense. We have to own the fact that we have been programmed with the thoughts of others. The conscious mind is creative, and it can learn in many different ways. You can read a self-help book and not change your life because the subconscious must be reprogrammed. The subconscious learns by repetition. Our conscious mind can learn just by reading, but the subconscious mind has to be programmed through repetition. So this is very, very important. I wanted to cover that as well. I'm going to talk the last 10 minutes here or so before break about reincarnation. It's one of the laws of life is reincarnation. What we have in our middle brain and as something that's called a tailstock, it's a fragment of the universal consciousness. It is neutral. It's extremely neutral. Your spirit form learns. It evolves independently through your material consciousness. Your spirit form, its goal is to collect wisdom and knowledge through countless reincarnation. The spirit form is a tailstock, a fragment of the universal consciousness that comes in 21 days after the sperm fertilizes the egg. So the embryo, when it's 21 days old, becomes a person, when the spirit form comes in. So all decision-making, all thought processes come in when the spirit form come in, because it brings your material consciousness in. And the spirit form enters in the human being to collect wisdom and knowledge and love through countless reincarnations. And the spirit form eventually merges back with creation. And that helps the creation to evolve. Wisdom is a kind of knowledge that produces energy. And when we produce the energy associated with wisdom, we help the whole creation to evolve. Billy has a book called The Decalogue, and I've never read it. Parts of it have been translated by Michael Udebrook from Figu, Canada, and he read this part in his movie on reincarnation. It says, "The creation is the being and the non-being of life. It is the most immense mass of spiritual energy in the universe. It is spirit in its purest form, and unmeasurable in its wisdom, knowledge, love, harmony, and truth. It is something that is pure spiritual intelligence energy. The spirit is ungraspable for many human beings. The creation prevails over all. It stands in an unstoppable evolution. And the creation is sometimes called wisdom and love. Love and wisdom go together. And the creation and its laws are love and wisdom at the same time. When the spirit is in the other world, when it's not in the material world, it creates something called the overall consciousness block. The overall consciousness block is a storage bank in the other world. It's created by your spirit form. And it's the place where your previous personality, your previous consciousness is dissolved and absorbed, and a new one is built up. The overall consciousness block helps the creation and the programming of the new consciousness and the new personality. So, your evolutive values from your previous life are stored, are programmed into your subconscious and absorbed by your spirit form. The consciousness block, it contains your personality, your consciousness, and your ego. And after day 21, the spirit form and the consciousness block enter the body. The heart of the embryo starts to beat. The spirit form goes into the superior colliculus. The spirit form spreads its spiritual energy throughout every fiber of the body in a fine filigree. The spirit form enters within the human. Now this is a mystery, and I think I'm starting to understand. When the spirit form enters within the human, it's in your superior colliculus, but it's also still within its own realm. So I think the spirit form bilocates. I don't know how that happens, but it's true. Hopefully we'll get more elaboration on this as we continue to study. The spirit form is unable to be influenced by the material world through sickness, through disease. The ego or the I represents the personality, which is the material consciousness. Remember, creation doesn't have a personality, just like a tree doesn't have a personality. Right? It's a great analogy I want to cover during the next hour, is the analogy between the creation and the tree, because the tree is neither male nor female. The tree is completely neutral. The tree radiates a kind of splendor. The creation is the same way. You know, a tree is never upset. It's not cheerful one day and upset the next. It's in perfect stability. it really doesn't have a personality. It's not male or female. And I believe the universal consciousness is in some ways like the tree. So spend time studying trees. I recommend it. Another thing you'll notice about trees is when the branches grow, they grow in a kind of pattern which is very similar to the human circulatory system. So these are the repeating patterns of nature. If you look at the earth from above, you'll see that the rivers, they have the same branching structure as the trees. So in many ways, the tree reminds me of creation. And I think it helps us to understand what the trees are. They're in some ways extensions of the creation. They have a spirit form. They have no personality. I think they probably emanate a fluido energy of sorts. I tend to think I'm picking up on that. Hopefully Barbara is there. Barbara?
Barbara's here, and she has a correction for you. It's so infrequent that I can do this to you.
Okay.
Trees do have sexes. There are male and there are female trees.
Yeah, I thought about that because I was thinking about that today, but it's so subtle. Yeah, you have a point probably.
And they can feel pain, and they have emotions.
Now that would be an interesting study. I really like trees. I'm a tree person.
There's a new documentary out by a German forester. His name is Peter Woh.
That's great.
Lleben. And it does talk about how they like to stand together closely, and so I generally speaking, what you were saying, absolutely true, but there are sexes and they do have feelings.
That's great. I think it's very good points that you're making, and I was thinking about that today too, because like for example, my Jax, who's our new dog, he's a pit bull mix, and my goodness, you can tell that little dog is a male. Let me tell you that. I mean, he's not a real big dog, but so you have these real profound male characteristics in other kinds of creatures. He just came down, by the way. Did you know I was talking about you?
Well, and holly is another one. Holly, you have to have male and female plants in order to have berries.
No kidding.
Yeah. So I'm a gardener. So when you said, trees don't have sexes, and I'm thinking, wait.
So technically they do.
Absolutely.
But they don't have like pronounced secondary sex characteristics. Like the tree doesn't have a phallus or facial hair or nothing.
No,
like
but the pollen in I think it's pecan trees. They have to the pollen from one tree has to pollinate another tree. It can't pollinate itself. Some can.
Okay.
Some can.
When I was in Munns Park many years ago, I was walking in the woods with Michael Horn and a lady that used to run the study, but she doesn't anymore, long story. But Michael had said something along the lines of that the Pleiadians say that when you plant trees, they should be 20 feet apart, and I don't know why. And I'm not even sure that that's true, that that's in the contact reports. I've never actually read it myself. But when I planted the trees in my yard, when I've had the guys come and plant, I've kind of used that as a general rule. But if you look at a forest, like you were saying, sometimes they're like right together. Is that the way nature works? Like the trees stand right together?
Well, like oak trees drop their acorns, and then little baby trees grow up, and then it's the survival of the fittest, actually. But yeah, they do. There are stands of trees, and you don't see them isolate too often at all.
Yeah, I've noticed that.
So yeah, they and because I garden, with the plants, I never plant just one plant. I plant two or three because it just feels like if they're all together, they'll grow stronger.
Well, let me ask you about this. I was talking to the guy that cuts my grass, and I have certain areas in my yard where there's a lot of moisture. He was saying in some of those areas it's like too much moisture for even the trees. Do you have any thoughts on that, or any opinion one way or another? I mean,
well, weeping willow trees grow in that kind of soil.
Okay, he said that too. He said that, so.
But they have a very shallow root system, so they get blown over easily.
Oh, is that right?
So yeah, so you have to watch out for that. But there are plants that really require a great deal of water. So off the top of my head, I can't think of one.
Okay.
But yeah, no, there are some trees that, well, you've seen. Look at down in the bayous. There are trees that are in
Cypress.
3-4 feet of water. Sure.
Cypress. We've even got cypress trees over in the park in a certain area where there's a miniature kind of swamp. It's not real big, but it's like a swampy area, and there's big cypress trees there. Boy, I'm getting off of Billy Meyer, but it's kind of all related, I think, in some ways.
Well, it is. And, when you were talking about the energy, I had a question. When you were talking about the skeleton holding memories, but when we pass away, our consciousness goes to the consciousness banks and then the overconsciousness banks. So all that material is already stored someplace else.
Well, it's something about the fine fluido energies that are stored in the skeleton that when we reincarnate, the subconscious makes a back connection to those energies. And somehow, I'm not sure exactly what it does, but it helps us. It gives us, I'm assuming, maybe a confidence or a reassurance or something. And there's a great film out on YouTube by Michael Uderbrook from Figu, Canada, where he goes into the fluido energies, and it's a 4-part movie. Try to look for it, and you should be able to find it. Anyone listening to the show, it's very, very helpful. I'm not an expert in this area by any means, but it's extremely interesting.
Okay, if that's the case, then when you go into old churches that have relics of past saints, those bones would contain the fluidal energies of that spirit.
That's true.
Still.
Yeah.
So if you're sensitive enough, can you tap into that energy?
Well, you typically don't tap into it. What happens is the fluidal energies, especially in the old monasteries, what's stored there is very negative. And if you're a sensitive person, the last thing you want to do is go into these old churches, because you'll feel overwhelmed by the energy. And it's mostly negative. In these old churches, it's mostly ununderstanding, as Billy calls it, or negative energies. A lot of abuse goes on in these old monasteries and churches, and a lot of wrong thinking.
But then in places like 9/11, where 3,000 people just kind of evaporated. I mean, there has to be bone fragments there of some sort.
There could be. As a kid, I felt that I was very, very sensitive. I didn't know anything about this stuff. But, I always remember when my parents and I were going, on these trips, and we would stop someplace in Tennessee or North Carolina, which was an old Civil War place, and I would always just feel this horrible energy. And I've been that way my whole life. I would drive past places, as a kid, and I'd feel this horrible energy, and I just couldn't wait till we got past it. And I just never said anything about it. I assumed everyone had these feelings, but I'm thinking probably to a greater or lesser degree. So now at least I have an understanding of what's going on to a certain level.
But there are positive ones too.
The only positive fluido energies I've ever experienced are from nature, from my pets, and from my own fluido energies. Like, I've never been to a place where a lot of human beings congregated where I felt anything that was mostly positive. I don't know. I'm just saying that's my experience personally, Usually, for some reason, when there's a large group of people, I don't think it'll always be that way. I think eventually, when humanity evolves, it's going to be different. Barbara, can you take over for just for a second? I've got a dog with an issue.
Oh, sure.
Thank you.
Well, now that the show is mine, I have had similar experiences, but in a more positive way. I've been in places where I just knew it was safe, knew it was protected. When I moved from my old house in Westchester up to Connecticut, I walked into the house that I now live in, and I walked through the downstairs, and I looked at the realtor and I said, buy it. And she said, don't you even want to see the rest of the house? And I said, nope, this is where I belong. This is where I feel safe. I feel protected. I feel secure. And she thought I was crazy, but she was my realtor, so she had to do what I said. And the property that I now live on is so, I mean, people come into the house and they say, oh my God, it's so peaceful here. I feel so safe. And so, I know it wasn't just me, but it's true. There's such a sense here of peacefulness, protection, security, harmony, and bliss, absolute bliss. It's really cool.
Mm-hmm.
So I've experienced that feeling in several places too. So mostly the times I've experienced it, though you're right, has been in nature. It hasn't been in a building or somebody else's house. And usually I've been alone when I felt it.
Very interesting, yeah. This is Steve, by the way. How are you?
Hi, Steve.
Nice to meet you. Now, were you married at the time too? Did your husband or partner feel the same way when they went in the house?
No, I wasn't. I was divorced, and my mother had passed away, and I had to move, and so I looked all over the place. I finally found this one, and when my last husband, he was in California and I was here, and we met on the internet, and he eventually came east and walked into the house, and he said, oh my God, there's something magical here.
Mm-hmm.
So
thank you for taking over, Barbara.
Oh, you're back. Okay.
I'm back. I had a little doggy issue to take care of. One of them's a senior, and I gotta when he makes motions, I gotta go. It's about all there's to it.
Absolutely.
You were talking. That's a really interesting. Continue that conversation. It sounded interesting.
Yeah, it's not.
So Patrick picked up on positive vibes from your home.
He did, and he was paranormal. There was nothing metaphysical about him. And he said the first time he was here, and we went to bed. He said, "Aren't you going to lock the house up?" And I said, "Why?" And he said, "Aren't you worried?" And I said, "Not at all." And now I will admit, I'm on a dirt road, and there are only two other houses on the dirt road, so it wasn't a matter that I was on a busy thoroughfare or anything like that. But I have never. We had a tornado. It didn't hit the house. It hit the property, but not the house. and I know, I go back to, I know the original house was built in 47, and it was a little old French woman who lived here by herself. So, and she gardened, and after she passed away, two other people owned the house, and then I came, and there were no gardens here, but I immediately put in huge gardens, and it's protected. I've had bears spend the afternoon in my yard.
Wow.
And,
That's great. That's interesting.
Yeah, well, they ripped up all of my bird feeders, but
Wow.
And I've had all sorts of wildlife here that one doesn't expect, and it's like it's a sanctuary, and it's just an amazing place to live, and I'm so very fortunate to have found it and to be living in it.
It's interesting what you were saying about a sanctuary, because I feel that way about my home, and particularly this area is still a sanctuary. We've kind of been attacked lately by the utility company around here. Has just done a heck of a lot of damage to the local trees. I guess they've decided to clear everything away from the power lines. So they just mauled a lot of the trees around here. In fact, I purposely drive another way to work just so I don't have to look at that, because it's very depressing to me to see that. But we still got a lot of incredibly beautiful areas around here. It's just an amazing place, just overwhelmingly beautiful. As I was saying earlier, I've got like 30 trees on the property now and I definitely want to continue to plant. So I think I get a lot out of my trees. They give me more than I've ever given them, I would have to say.
Well, yeah, I know that feeling.
And in many ways, I think creation itself is kind of like a tree. The way I look about creation, because creation, even though trees, like you said, and I was thinking about that too earlier, technically speaking, we do have male and females in the plant world and even in the trees, but they're much more neutral, let's say. And that's kind of the way creation is. It's very interesting that trees don't have a personality in the sense that we human beings think of a personality. And it's the same way with creation. Creation also doesn't have a personality per se. What I wanted to talk about the first 15 minutes or so of the second hour, I guess we've already kind of got into the first 15 minutes, so I wanted to go back over Emmanuel a little bit. And one of the most profound things that I learned that impacted me was the information about the letter J. Because, we think of the Jesus Christ as being the kind of the most important person in our history. Well, it was very amazing to me to learn that his name couldn't have been Jesus Christ. One of the things that I always felt kind of weird about the Myra information was they claimed his name was Emmanuel. And it wasn't until I learned that the letter J didn't appear until the 1500s, roughly, or so. There was no letter J in the Greek of the New Testament or in the Hebrew or Aramaic of the Old Testament. There was no J sound. So even today we say Jehovah or Job or Jesus. But in the time of writing, it was Yahovah or Yob, and it was never Jesus. They didn't have the J sound. And that was one of the most profound things. It was one of those things where I felt cognitive dissonance, where all of this, what I would call unvalues that were in my mind associated to religion slowly started to dissolve away. And Stephen, I think you may have had some of that experience yourself. Is that correct?
Oh, certainly, yeah. Yeah, definitely coming from that background.
Well, didn't they find an ossuary that they said was that of Jesus and his family?
I have heard people mention this. Now,
But they didn't spell it with a J either. They spelled it correctly.
well, this is good. Now, I would tend to think that would not be true because my understanding is that after his crucifixion, he went to India. Is at least what I've understood over the years. Now, I'm sure there's probably some discussion about that.
Well, isn't it in India that they actually have found a tomb that they say is his? They called him Isa, though.
I've heard that. Now, Stephen asked, why do they spell it with a J now? Well, now they do spell it with a J. The Lyrian did have the letter J. None of the ancient Earth languages had the letter J. Not the Greek, not the Hebrew, not the Aramaic. No one. If you look at a 1611 version of the King James Bible, which is one of the first translations, not the first, but one of the first translations into English, you'll find the book of IOB. The book, the person that we call Jesus today was called IESBS. James was IAMES. John was IOHN. So there was no letter in the ancient Greek, no letter J in the ancient Greek language. For example, you have an alpha in the ancient Greek, which corresponds to our A in English. You have a beta, which corresponds to our B. You have a gamma, which corresponds to our G. You have a delta, which corresponds to our D, and so on and so on. There is no letter J in the Greek. You know, alpha, beta, gamma, delta, epsilon, zeta, eta, theta, iota, kappa, lambda, mu, nu, xi, omicron, pi, rho, sigma, tau, epsilon, phi, chi, psi, and omega. That's all they had. They didn't have a letter J. Now, the New Testament is written in Koine Greek. So they never, ever called him Jesus. They could not have. Their language didn't support it. Now, some people say he was called Jesus or Iesus. Now, interesting, the Meyer material says his name is Emmanuel. I haven't been able to prove that is true. But at least in my humble opinion, I've proved that he couldn't have been called Jesus Christ, which to me is a total shocker. Do you feel any shock from that, Stephen? Or not?
Not really, no. I mean,
Okay.
it depends on what the name means to a person, I guess. But because people change it to their language so they can pronounce it, I suppose. But
Exactly.
yeah,
Exactly. But you would think if they were trying to preserve an ancient text in its absolute, if this was the unalterable Word of God, they wouldn't have changed these people's names.
right.
You know,
Right.
this is where I just vibrate. You know, I just want to go, you know.
Name above all names, but yet they spell it differently or pronounce it differently.
They just take the artistic. Oh, we're gonna
Liberty.
call him whatever we want to. It's ridiculous. It's like anyway.
Yeah, but wait, with all those translations, they went from Hebrew or Aramaic to Greek to Latin to English. I mean, any name could have been screwed up in that kind of a translation.
They were all screwed up. You know,
Wouldn't it be funny if his name was really Herbie?
it could have been, for all we know.
Yeah.
But you know what's interesting is I believe there are other writings that have been found in the Dead Sea Scrolls. which refer to his name as Emmanuel. And the reason I say that is because I had George Green on the show, and his father was an extremely wealthy man, and they knew some of the archaeologists which worked in the Dead Sea Scrolls. And George Green said, "Oh yeah, his name was really Emmanuel." And this is George Green kind of came across the Meyer material a little bit later, but he never really picked it up.
Wasn't Mary visited by an angel, according to the Bible, and said, "You're going to have a son, and his name will be Emmanuel"?
Yeah.
So where did Jesus come from?
They made it up.
Phew.
They made it up. This is what makes me just vibrate. It just, I want to yell. Go ahead.
The biggest thing for me too is what did he teach? See, I mean, it's one thing to have his name pronounced wrong or something.
Right.
There's a lot of debate in like what the name of God is in the Old Testament. I mean, you'll have people argue that all day long.
I know.
But what did the man teach, regardless of his name?
Well,
what is it that he taught?
If they didn't preserve his name, are they going to preserve his teaching?
Bingo. There you go. Winner, chicken dinner. Right.
Exactly. Another thing I was going over, and there's a 2011 interview of Billy, and it was an interview. A lot of the questions came from kids who asked, is there a heaven? Mm-hmm. And Billy, he answers this question, no, there is no heaven, in the sense that the religions teach, there's a sky, and he talked, along these lines. And I was thinking to myself, every Christian believes when they die, they go to heaven and to be with God. So I went, and I spent about 20 minutes on this, just searching through Bible Gateway, because it'll search whatever version of the Bible you want, to search the word heaven. And it appears like 90% of the time in terms of the sky, the heavens, it's just talking about the sky. Yeah, that's Hebrew, right? Mm-hmm. So it also occasionally talks about the throne of God being heaven. Now that's very interesting, because I think of Jehovah, and I think of the flying cities that are talked about in the older Purana writings, and I think of that these Giza intelligence probably had flying ships. So there was they saw a throne in the sky, which was maybe a ship. This is pure speculation, but it's real interesting that the New Jerusalem of the New Testament, right? You probably read that, Stephen, right?
Oh yeah,
it's a flying city. So they're talking there. I cannot find a verse that actually says when you die, you go to heaven, this paradise, to live with God. I cannot find that verse.
No, the only one that I know of that they talk about referring to death, and I can't remember exactly where it came from. That's gone from the moment. But the verse goes something like this: You live for a certain number of years, you toil, you live hard, you struggle, and then you die. And then the next line is, and then you fly away.
Okay.
It doesn't say where you go, but it says you fly away.
See, this is where I think you hit a limit. And what I hit, long before I ever found the material, the Meyer material, and I had some good pastors, but you're really hitting a limit. You're not going to learn anymore. When you have verses like that, you fly away. And I think I've heard it explained, where is heaven? It's above. You just can't, you cannot go anywhere after that. It's like a cul-de-sac. You cannot go any farther. You cannot learn anymore. So that's, I guess, the frustration with religion, right?
Just taking this back to the beginning of your show, what I found so encouraging about it, you look at the law of love, the law of striving, harmony, those three things being in place, you have that law of prosperity and abundance, and it makes sense. There's nothing contradictory in it. It makes logical sense, and then you're looking at that law of universal creation, the cause and effect
of thinking.
And to me, right, and that makes sense to me. It's brilliant simplicity.
That's it. Go ahead.
Well, I think to me, when people talk about heaven, I mean, there is not a celestial rest home up there.
Thank you for saying that. Right.
Mm-hmm.
I
What
mean,
would the purpose be of it? What's the purpose of that?
Mm-hmm.
Whereas I see working our way through this and becoming, more and more full of wisdom and knowledge, and it's a slow process.
yeah, and it just it makes me crazy when people say, "Well, I'm done." And it's like, are you kidding? You're still here. You're not done.
Now, I can see if you've lived a very hard life, that the thought of coming back and living that kind of life again would be that cognitive dissonance that we talked about. It's difficult to think about that.
Right.
But once you start understanding these principles, I look forward to it now and say, boy, it's wonderful. It's a wonderful thing to learn these things and to have.
You know what else?
To work it out.
Sorry to interrupt you, Steve. You know what else? I look forward to death too, because I get a break for a while. You know what I mean? Seriously.
Are you sure? Are you really sure you get a break?
Well, if I'm yanked out of the spirit realm, I won't because of overpopulation, but I'm hoping I'm getting a break for a while. Which can happen,
I do believe there's work going on still on the other side.
Right, but it's like, my material consciousness, I won't be experiencing it at that level. It's like, the spirit form is it's like this juggernaut. It's just like the creation. It never gets tired. It never grows old. It never, it does require a rest period, but, it's, a great time is 311 trillion years. And during that whole process, the creation is evolving. Us frail humans, man, we need a break. You know what I'm saying? We get tired.
Yeah, but you're not going to be a human when you get over there. That's the thing.
Well, I'll be dissolved. I mean, I'm essentially gone, except for my material consciousness will be absorbed to a degree in the storage banks and programmed into the spirit form and into the subconscious. And but I don't look at death as this horrible thing. I look forward to it.
Well, it's not an ending; it's a beginning.
Yeah. Go ahead, Stephen. What were you going to say?
Yeah, not only just the death, but just the striving. Because sometimes we look at that in life and think it's difficult. And but I look at even Billy as an example, who, if it's true that he's been billions of years old, well, what did he have to strive through? Well, he was born into a religious home, he had to strive through that and to come to realization of truth. He had to strive through a difficult marriage. And you'd think after billions of years that you'd be able to pick a mate that would be perfect for you, but what happened? That's striving.
And they told him to pick her.
Right.
Like he had to deal with that for those problems.
That's pretty deep when you think about it, isn't it?
Oh, man. I just think, I'm glad I'm not him. That would be, horrible.
Don't sign me up for that class.
Yeah, I'm not ready. I don't want that class. I don't want my left arm cut off either.
There you go.
Let me just be official about all this. I'll state my whole case here, and I'll think I don't want 20 attempts on my life.
Right.
Yeah.
Now think of all the things he had to strive through, because it's so important. It's one of the laws of creation, and we don't fully understand it. I don't anyway.
No, I don't.
But I'm coming to learn a little bit more about it after studying this with you and others. It's.
What's so cool is that a lot of times, if we just let go, all of this will fall into place for us. And it's very, very interesting how that works. And I'm learning that, like, if there's some negative in my life, the law of harmony, you have a negative and a positive. If I have this negative in my life, and instead of fighting against it, just to let go.
Yeah, but Mark, if you just let go, there's no motion, there's no intent, there's no direction. And aren't you in a material form and in a material reality in order to experience even mistakes?
Well, I guess maybe I better articulate this a little bit better. Like, there are circumstances. I'll give you an example.
Okay.
My oldest dog, I really kind of know he's heading around third, heading for home. Okay. And he's to an age where, he's 120 pounds, and I can't get him into the back of a vehicle anymore. So I found these people, which are wonderful people, and they're 40 minutes away or so, but they will come to your home and help older, particularly large animals. And the lady was a wonderful lady, and she prescribed like 3 medications for him, and she was only focusing on the joint problems, which he had, and how do I say this with humility? But my job is to be logical. Like, that's what I do 8 to 10 hours a day, as I solve logic problems as a software developer, computer programmer. So I could see the fallacy in that to begin with, because he has a big tumor on his neck. Some of his hair is falling out. He has difficulty breathing. So I wasn't sure what to do. So I just let it go. I didn't argue with her. I took all the medications. I didn't give them to the dogs, but I just let it all go for a while. Well, he made a tremendous improvement the past week or so. Now, she told me in 2 weeks that she'll give me prednisone if I'm not seeing any improvement. So we're seeing improvement, but it's not from any of the drugs. So I'll have to figure out what'll happen in the 2 weeks and anything. But he's showing, he's had tremendous improvement from prednisone in the past. It shrinks the tumor. For him, it seems great. Now, it does have some side effects. And I've also noticed in my workplace, I've gotten a lot of assignments and difficulties that are really outside my job description, and which I shouldn't have been assigned to me. So I've had to learn to just accept them. In other words, accept the negative, let it be, stay neutral positive, and stop fighting against the negative. If that makes any sense, just to be neutral, positive towards it. So that's what I mean, if that helps explain anything.
Yeah, it does. Because, when negative comes my way, I try to understand it. I try to embrace it and understand the purpose of it. So that it's kind of like, okay, this is a lesson. What am I supposed to evolve out of this?
Perfect. And that's exactly what I'm saying. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, maybe in other words. Stephen, did you have something to say there?
No, I just have a cough. I'm sorry.
I was feeling your thoughts. I was thinking you were having profound thoughts.
Okay.
Don't quit the day job, Mark.
Oh, I'm not supposed to do that, am I? We should have readings. Let's do that. You keep having all these people that call you all the time to have readings. I'll give them a reading, by golly. They'll love it.
I would be happy to provide you with that opportunity if you
nice.
went by my rules.
Okay.
And my rule is that you never say anything to a caller if it isn't something that you would gladly accept for yourself.
That's a good way to do it. That's a good way to do it. You know what's interesting is all these, you have a huge following probably of people that want readings.
Uh-huh.
But what they really need is to learn the power of their own thoughts, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely. That's why I don't do the readings anymore.
So you just said, hell with it.
No, well, they kept asking me questions, same question every time they called. And I realized at some point that sometimes the questions they were asking weren't what they really needed to hear. So then I got to the point where I would say, I will give you a reading, but I will give you what Spirit gives me, and you can't ask a question. And they still kept calling.
That's really interesting.
And so I finally realized that I had created thousands of people who were codependent on my radio show.
Exactly.
And
what
it
I
was
was
like,
going to say. Yes, go ahead.
holy crap, what have I done? So then I stopped doing readings and I started doing interviews and I started putting out spiritual philosophy. And I am so much happier and more comfortable. And I still do readings, but I don't do them on the radio because I felt that it was doing a disservice to people. Originally, I did it because I thought I would be of service. I'll give it away for people who can't afford to do to pay for one. And I found that the only people that called were people that had become addicted to getting readings. And sometimes people were waiting in the queue and they had 3 or 4 different phones on 3 or 4 different shows waiting to get 3 or 4 different readings.
That is so amazing. So we have a whole underclass of people that have no confidence in themselves.
Yeah.
So what they need is to learn optimism and cheerfulness and confidence.
Exactly.
And thinking. They need to have faith in their own thinking.
Well, when you stop to think about it, every spirit is different. Every spirit is unique. Every spirit may have come from the same source, but every time they evolve, they are using different parameters through which they are working. And so the spirit within has the roadmap for this lifetime. So check it out. Don't ask other people's opinions, because the only thing they can give you is what they would do in their life, which is inappropriate for yours.
You know, this is kind of off topic a little bit, but it reminds me very much of this in a sense, but like the opposite scenario, where one person doesn't know the power of their own thinking at all, which is really sad. And I wonder somehow if you could reach those people now, Barbara. Do you think you could talk to them with any of this material, or would it just fall on deaf ears, do you think?
No, I believe that the material is very valid, but I also think that the Meyer material
is complicated.
Has to be given out in spoonfuls instead of tablespoons.
Oh, I spray a fire hose, I do.
I know you do. And
so I want to give this show over to you guys so I can go back to living a life of degeneracy where I, belong. Yeah, I'm just kidding.
No, but the Meyer material has a great deal of wonderful information in it, but it is so heavy.
It's heavy.
That people will veer away from it. It's kind of like, people's reading level is usually, 7th to 8th grade level. That's what newspapers are printed on, and the Meyer material is printed on a PhD level.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
So if you start in slowly and you talk about, your thought is powerful, and with your thought you can do and create much. And if you go from that and you work your way up to, the might of thought, that works. But you can't sit down and Meyer material is definitely not cocktail material. It's let's start studying. And most people don't want to study. So you give it to them in little dribs and drabs, and those who are enticed by it will keep coming back for more and more and more, and then you send them on to where the material is.
Like give them a little dropper, like one of those little eyedroppers, like a little drop. Yeah. Like almost you give a kitten a little bit of milk, like a little eyedropper for it.
Well, if you only have one piece of candy, you'll savor it. If you're given the whole box, you'll make yourself sick.
Right. That's interesting. That's a very interesting analogy. Somebody said something like that everything like in the Meyer material isn't spelled out always. Like these creational natural laws, I've had to look for them. And I think that's done on purpose.
Oh, yeah.
Well, according to the Spiritualist Church, there are universal laws, and they correspond very much to Billy's laws.
Interesting.
And when I designed the deck of cards and painted them, one of the sections of the cards are the universal energies and the cosmic laws. And that entails everything that Billy is putting out there. So, and I didn't have the Meyer material to work from. So I really feel that the Meyer material has come through in many different places, in many different ways, to approach many different levels of consciousness. Even though it isn't directly related back to Billy Meyer, it's the same information, but it's given in a different way so different people will touch into it and utilize it. Because, and I'm not saying the spiritual church just is the way to go. I mean, the Toth material as well has the same kind of material in it. It's Billy has put it all together in ways that certainly overwhelm any other modality that has the material in it. But you'll find pieces here and there all over the place that correspond to it. So I think that Billy's material is out there more than you realize, but in different ways.
And that makes sense because he's not a god. He's just a human being that, just like all these other people that have good things to teach too.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Right.
You know, I got this, getting back to the mind of thoughts, I got this buddy who I kind of got to know maybe 8 years ago or so. I dropped a CD off at his venue, and I wanted to play there at times, and I've gotten to know him better and better over the years, and so now we play together sometimes, and we'll play out together from time to time. And I played down at his club Thursday. What's today? Saturday? Mm-hmm. And what's really interesting, you talk about a guy that has mindful thoughts. He bought this old building. I mean, this is a guy who was a baker. He didn't have a lot of money. He bought this old building in Zanesville. He had to tear out like this whole bottom section in the floor. He had to go buy the big beer brewing things, and he didn't have a lot of money. He had to go buy used stuff, and he always did it incrementally. So while he was working this other job, he was also working on this. He was creating a brewery, and he eventually bought a big oven for pizza, and so he opened this venue maybe 10 years ago or something. I don't know, exactly 12 years ago. But it's all been done by his own thoughts, his own initiative, his own hard work. And, you know, most people would say, no, you can't succeed. No, you know, you're not going to succeed. He didn't listen to any of that. Mm. He said, BS. He said, I'm going to do this. And he did it. It's very impressive because he doesn't really know this material, but through his own thinking and his own effort, he went down this path, if you know what I mean. There's a lot of people that have shown initiative over the years to be able to do this kind of. I had to have it in a book. You know what I'm saying? Mm-hmm.
Well, you know, there are sages out there. There are Ishwishes out there that don't have a sign over their door. Enter here, those who want to be enlightened. I mean,
that's true.
I mean, it's true. I love Billy's story though about his greatest teacher though. That's his story well worth repeating.
His greatest teacher?
Yep. Oh, he got it from the Dalai Lama.
Oh, Billy got this information from the Dalai Lama?
Yep.
Okay, I'm not familiar with that.
Somebody asked the Dalai Lama. Well, the Dalai Lama was exiled from his home in Tibet, and he lived as a refugee. Mm-hmm. And the fact that he lived as a refugee taught him a great deal. And somebody asked him who was his greatest teacher, and he said Mao Zedong.
Oh, that's right. You told me this story. Now I remember it. Go ahead.
And they said, "What do you mean Mao Zedong? He exiled you. You were driven into the wilderness, literally." Mm-hmm. And Billy said, "Yes, but he taught me patience. He taught me peace. He taught me forgiveness. He was my greatest teacher."
That was the Dalai Lama, right?
Yeah.
So, and that
How
kind of
come
goes.
I know these? How come I know these stories and you don't know them?
Where I didn't know. Is this related to the Meyer information or?
Yeah.
Okay. Is that out on the mankind or the future mankind side or?
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah, it is.
Okay. See, it's interesting, and I'd be interested to hear what Stephen says about this, because what happened to me, and that I know the people in Colorado are the same way, is like after you study this stuff for a while, like you become interested in his books. And like, I don't go back to the contact reports that often anymore. I'd like to. Stephen, have you noticed that too?
Yeah. Because I went through those once, and then since that time, I've been more involved in reading the books. Yeah, I find them interesting, and I'll go back into them for if I have a question on something that I remember. Like I think they mentioned something about that topic. I'll go look it up and see what they have to say. But
there's a lot of very valuable information in those contact reports.
Well, let me ask you both something. You have been immersed in this material for a long time. How has it changed your life?
Well, I do not have, like I used to have, anxiety on a regular basis. I don't really experience anxiety hardly at all, particularly like associated with my work, because you're constantly facing unknowns and deadlines and things like that. I don't really get anxiety anymore. It's helped me a lot in my playing, that I don't get the wrong thinking that produces anxiety. And the other thing that I don't experience anymore, or I very seldom experience, is I used to have humongous issues with repeating negative thoughts. Like there would be something that would trigger me, and I might go for a half an hour, 2 hours, half a day, repeating some negative thought over and over, trying to analyze it, whatever. So I don't do that anymore. So this is a huge weight lifted off of me. But I still think I'm like I said today, just learning this new law of universal creation is on page 12 in this book. Where the hell was I the first 10 times I read it, My brain wasn't there. So that's telling me that my brain is not always there, that my consciousness isn't really engaged all the time.
Well, that's probably why you're here.
Yeah.
How about you, Stephen?
Well, it kind of is like when you went to your house, Barbara, and you felt that peace and that wonderful feeling of being in that house. That's the same thing with this information. When I study it, I'm happy, and it brings me, not just cognitive things, that you learn, but it's a peace, and it makes sense to me. And I searched for that for many years in religion, and you'd come and go, and you'd have days that were good, but I'd always have this undercurrent of fear, or you're not good enough, or there's things you have to change, and now I look at it and say, hey, if I make a mistake, I acknowledge it, and I just move forward, and I learn from it, and I move forward, and my life is so much more happy and peaceful, and I love it. I mean, every time I study the information, it just brings me back to that place of contentment and happiness that it's hard to describe. It's wonderful.
Well, you're following your bliss. That's terrific.
Yeah. There's just no guilt, and it's just it's life, and life is a wonderful thing, and the good and the bad, you just have to learn from it, and it's a wonderful journey.
I always go back to love letter 27. Love is the highest principle in all creation, and through it everything exists in absolute logic. Every tiny plant, every tiny animal fulfills its purpose in love, and love will forever be the purpose of our existence. So like you talk about just saying those words.
Right. How can somebody say that is not true? How
They
can anybody
can't.
argue that? Right. It's wonderful. See? It doesn't separate people. It doesn't put, I just love it. It's just wonderful. It bridges its truth. And that's what I look for years. And It's nice.
Yeah. Very, very, very good. I could spend like all my time focused on that. That's part of the spiritual teachings, I think. I don't think that book is completely open to the public. Love Letter 27. I think you have to actually be a true member of the FIGU. Maybe that'll get me in. I don't know. I think we're out of time, folks.
Yeah.
Thanks, Barbara. Thanks, Stephen.
Okay. Take
See
care.
you.
Bye-bye.
welcome.
Bye-bye.